Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update. First part thereof, and it's so late already, for the 11th of April 2024. Sorry about the delay, real life gets in the way. And actually there's a lot of news to talk about, none of it particularly good. We'll start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures, which I suppose is a high point for pro-Ukrainian sentiments here. The caveats to all of these figures, of course, in the description below. There were 810 personnel lost by the Russians yesterday. It's a fairly high number, but it's been where it's been for the last 5 days. 5 tanks, it's a lower number. We have seen phenomenal numbers of tanks taken out this week. 12 APVs, again lower. 48 artillery systems is a very high number in that category. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 50 vehicles and fuel tanks, pretty high number there, and 6 pieces of special equipment. So all in all, not the highest we've seen, but we have been seeing incredibly high numbers over the last 4 or 5 days. So those numbers you would expect to come down at some point, and that's where we see it at the moment. I don't know if that's reflective of slightly less activity taking place on the front lines, possibly because the Russians have lost so many pieces of kit. And we go to Andrew Perpetua's loss stats, and these are for yesterday, so he's a little bit behind. He's crazily overworked at the moment. If anyone wants to reach out to them, if they have some spare time each day to just do, it would be very monotonous, and you have to keep on to make sure the data is comparable. You have to do exactly how it is set out, so there's no variation. But if you have some spare time to dedicate to doing some help, I guess, with data collection and synthesis and assimilation, please reach out to Andrew. His loss stats for yesterday were phenomenally bad for the Russians, as you can see here. That is something like, I don't know, 7-to-1 loss ratios, something like that, maybe more, maybe less, but it's just really bad for the Russians. Let's look at the value of the stuff. And again, this is where it's all sort of worse news from here on in. The Ukrainians have lost nothing of real high value there, compared to the Russians, who have lost a number of bits of kit here. Included in this is a plane, a Beriev B-200, Ukrainian drone strike, or failed air defense. So I'm not sure of that plane, but I'll have to look into that. Book air defense system, probably one of the ones I showed you yesterday. Some electronic warfare stuff, including Borisogledsk 2, taken out by a ram drone. That's a new type of drone that I've seen on this list. Some surveillance and comms equipment, a recovery vehicle, Brem destroyed, 2 engineering vehicles. So we've seen a lot of Brems lost recently, those recovery vehicles being severely attrited away, I think, by the Ukrainians there. Artillery, we do have a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system to add to some of those older bits of kit. Some tanks there, including T-72s, T-62s, and then just a massive list of infantry fighting vehicles, BMPs, BMP-2s and 3s, 1s, 2s and 3s, BTRs, and so on and so forth. It's just a huge, massive equipment. And then when it comes to trucks, Kamaz and Urals, some Russian military trucks, a number of those taken out of service, as well as civilian vehicles and ATVs. So just a huge, massive equipment that adds up, and that's just a completely unsustainable loss. And I know Andrew's really struggling at the moment because, as I said, he's struggling. There's just so much data coming through. The number of videos that are now coming out are phenomenal, and the Russians are just losing an awful lot of kit. Neil Hauer adds to this idea by saying something getting lost in the understandable doom and gloom about the present state of the Russia-Ukraine war is the absolutely insane scale and rate of continued Russian vehicle losses. These are not remotely sustainable. So dipping into another open source intelligence analysis, 984 Russian losses against 152 Ukrainian losses in the Pokrovsk region. So that is the area in the Avdiivka. The Avdiivka salient is pushing towards that city of Pokrovsk further to the west there. So the Avdiivka sector has seen massive Russian losses of equipment, and that needs to be remembered. But where the Russians are having success is with their strikes, their missile and drone strikes at the moment. Okay, General Chris Cavoli, we're going to dip into what he says to a larger extent later, I think, in my next video. General Chris Cavoli, commander of the US European Command, tells HASC. So that is a hearing that we're actually going to hear a little bit more from, because there's some highly controversial stuff coming out of that the Russians are currently firing 5 times as many artillery shells on the battlefield, and that number will go up to 10 to 1 in a matter of weeks. We're not talking about months. So that is if the Ukrainians don't get an awful lot of kit delivered to them soon. Here's an example of just one bit of footage. I could show you lots of footage. I'm just going to show you this. What's going on here, I'm going to tell you about it mainly. We had an accident. Guys were blown up in a workshop unit where we were repairing FPV drones, and all the equipment was completely burned. There were explosions for 2 more days. Peaceful Russian drone operators were making ammunition for drones in their workshop unit, and then when suddenly one of them had a grenade explode, the soldier's arms were torn off. His comrade was also wounded. The video is of a Russian soldier from a temporarily occupied part of the Kherson region. I'm showing you this because this will be the case for both sides. It's incredibly dangerous working with FPV drones, drones that are dropping munitions. Having to work with those munitions in dugout workshops like that is not going to be the safest environment to do your day job. And it's not going to be the safest day job. This is a challenge for both sides, but there we have an example of where a workshop is being ripped apart by an explosion that wasn't planned. Now, going on to Russian plane losses here. In total, Russia recognised 13 cases of friendly fire in its aviation. This is on the back of a potential loss yesterday in Crimea at Chornomorsk. It's this helicopter, a Mi-24. That was either shot down by, reports are friendly fire. The Russians are saying it had a technical fault. But it's interesting that there are a number of planes that have supposedly been shot down by friendly fire. This is a problem for the Russians, a recurring problem that they don't seem to have solved so far. Now, Avdiivka coke plant, this is where the Russians are, but where the Ukrainians are hitting. Fuel and lubricants warehouses on fire somewhere near the coke plant. So the Ukrainians hitting back there. And last bit of good news is Yevgeny Polovodov, major of the press service in the Ministry of Defense of Russia, was liquidated. So this is a guy that was working effectively as a journalist in the Serebryensky forest, I believe. And he was killed. He was not supposed to be there by all accounts. He was working there with the team, and they got hit and taken out. They were dead and wounded. So that is effectively a propaganda arm of the Russian army being liquidated there. Right, now we get on to what I think is incredibly bad news. So what happened last night? During Russia's large attack overnight, Ukraine shot down almost all of the 24 cruise missiles. So that's, I guess, good news there. 16 out of 20, that's 80% of the KH-101 and 2 out of 4 of the KH-59. So that's slightly below 80%, so almost all. I wouldn't say it's that, but they did a fairly good job on cruise missiles, and almost all of the Shahed drones, 39 out of 40 is excellent. So Shahed drones is where the Ukrainians are having increased success, I think, with interception. 6 Kinzhals, so these hypersonic missiles, none of them were shot down. And then there were 12 as well. I don't know if it mentions it here. 12 S-300 missiles as well, sent into, I think mainly or maybe entirely, sent into Kharkiv, and they weren't shot down. In total, 4 cruise missiles, 2 KH-59, 4 KH-101, 2 KH-59, 6 Kinzhals and 1 Shahed drones hit their targets. Kinzhal missile hit the Tripilska thermal power plant 40 kilometers south of Kiev last night, and that's really bad news. We'll look at that in a second. S-300 is not included here. So these are the approximate routes of the drones and missiles. So we have the west around Lviv in the west being targeted really, really severely there. And then a Kinjal hitting Kyiv and some drones going to Kyiv. I presume... Oh, no, that's the KH-101. So I don't know what's the translation? I don't know. The blue is Kinjal. Yeah, no tracking of them on there. Probably because you can't tell when they're going to hit and then they suddenly hit. They are hypersonic. I presume they're going to be going out into the atmosphere somewhat more, the Kinjals, before coming down. Or is that, did we work out that wasn't their trajectory recently? Anyway, not good news. And then we have some missiles going towards Zaporizhia there. They could be Kinjals, I'm not really sure. But anyway, some of what was shot into Ukraine last night has been mapped here, and you can see that mainly you've got Zaporizhia, Kyiv, and Lviv, or south of Lviv, as well as Kharkiv being hit by S-300s. Okay, so what Jay and Kyiv says about this, the approximate paths of Russian ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, and Iranian drones aimed at destroying the largest underground gas storage terminals in Europe this morning. About 70 projectiles were sent. Ukrainian air defense can no longer shoot down many missiles. DTEC thermal plants were damaged in Russia's attack overnight. 2 thermal power plants were hit in the latest overnight mass attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. In the Kyiv region, Ukrainian air defense wasn't able to prevent a strike on the critical infrastructure such as the Tripilska power station located south of the capital, one of the largest power generating facilities in the region, which is also supplying the Cherkasy and Zhytomyr regions. In total, 4 energy facilities were attacked by Russia across Ukraine. In the meantime, the US denounces and condemns Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil and gas infrastructure, can't get new aid to Ukraine done. Western partners lacking the speedy provision of significant amounts of proper air defense and other military equipment such as long-range missiles, and the EU cannot agree to use confiscated Russian funds for procurement of military equipment for Ukraine. But today, the Western media is probably again full of condemnations of this attack. In fact, this attack doesn't rate strongly enough in the mainstream media, to be quite frank with you. And it's a bad attack. You've got an entire power station taken out. That's $1 billion worth of facility destroyed in one fell swoop. Just gone. That's done. Until now, Kyiv was the most protected airspace in Ukraine, but it was not able to stop much of the incoming Russian missiles. That's no longer the case. With air defences exhausted, Russia is finally able to do what they want. Thermal power plant along the river at in Kyiv at 4 a.m. in the morning there, just up in smoke. And Phillips O'Brien says the US House is enabling this. All 100% of the generation of the state-owned energy company Centrenergo has now been destroyed. The Tripilska thermal power plant was the largest supply of electricity to Kyiv, Cherkasy and Zhytomyr regions, is gone, as mentioned. But they've also lost Centrenergo, this is. They lost Tripilia thermal power plant in Ukrainka in Kyiv Oblast, as well as Russian troops previously destroyed the company's Zmiev thermal power plant during the March 22 strike on Kharkiv Oblast. So in the last few weeks, this one company has lost its entire energy production capability. Is it going to have the money to be able to rebuild them? Highly unlikely. Another thermal power plant they owned is now under Russian occupation. It's the absolute shocker. Zaporizhia Oblast was attacked with 4 Kh-59 guided missiles. 2 of them were shot down. The other 2 hit an energy infrastructure facility. Sergei Sumleny here says, let me say it clear. Ukraine's power production is close to collapse, says this Eastern European expert. 1, coal and gas power stations are vital for balancing the demand and supply problem in the large network as they can increase and decrease production. 2, Ukraine's nuclear power plants cannot work without this balancing. 3, Ukraine's hydro power plants are too few and also targeted by the Russians. Several have been damaged. So effectively, 4, Russia provokes not only a blackout in a 40 million people country amid a war, but also a nuclear disaster for Ukraine's nuclear power plants must be shut down without a perspective to be launched soon again. 5, coal and gas plants plants also supply heat for larger cities. This will be another huge problem in just 6 months. All because someone in the White House and in the Chancellery decided to play escalation management. And this is freaking frustrating. You've got the douchebag Mike Johnson having his puppet strings pulled by Marjorie Taylor Greene and Trump. And I don't care what you say. I've had an argument with someone who's a great supporter of the channel saying this is Chinese disinformation that you're saying, and it's really poor form that Trump is not supportive of Ukraine and is behind this. I'm sorry, if Trump didn't exist, you wouldn't have Marjorie Taylor Greene spouting pro-Russian propaganda, and you wouldn't have Mike Johnson doing what he's doing or not doing what he's not doing. Like this, the buck stops there. It also stops the Biden administration for something else in a minute that I'm deeply annoyed about. But I'm sorry that if Trump was absolutely behind Ukraine, this would not be happening, because there would be a $64 billion aid package in Ukraine's hands, and it would have been there 6 months ago. If Trump was for Ukraine, came out and said, I fully support Ukraine, I unequivocally and explicitly support aid to Ukraine because it's in the best interest of the world, of the US, then you would have a military aid package in Ukraine already. But he's not said that. So I don't get that I'm spreading Chinese propaganda by saying that Trump is not supportive of aid and is largely behind, well, is almost entirely behind where the House of Representatives is at now. It's self-evidently true by what he said. It's true by what Orban has said that he has said. It's true by what his children say every single day. If you want to know what Trump thinks, go and ask his kids, because his Donald Trump Jr. is saying this every single day. Matt Gaetz is saying it. Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying it. These are his lackeys, right? And you're arguing that Trump is somehow super supportive of Ukraine, or at least we don't know, or it's up in the air. He could be. He's just keeping his cards close to his chest. No, we would not be in this position. Ukraine would not be in this position. The House of Representatives would not be in this position if he felt otherwise. So I'm not having that. This is not the US's fault per se, but the House of Representatives and certain people in the US have an awful lot to answer for. An awful lot to answer for. And I will do a video on that separately so I don't derail this too much. Europe is going to receive 10 million refugees this summer if it allows Putin to keep raising our power plants and cities. Yep. Burning people screaming for help under rubble is just another night in Kharkiv as Russian missile massacres are now non-stop. I can't show you that too closely. It's not a nice video. But people under rubble screaming in Kharkiv because S-300 missiles are slamming into that city because they have no way of shooting down those ballistic surface-to-air missiles being used in ground mode to slam into civilian infrastructure in the city. Russia has again attacked, says Nexta, Ukraine's energy infrastructure, generation facilities and transmission systems in Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Lviv and Kyiv regions have been attacked. At least 10 critical infrastructure facilities have been hit in Kharkiv. More than 200,000 subscribers of the region were left without power. In Kyiv region, missiles and drones attacked an infrastructure facility. A fire is now being extinguished there. Well, that power plant's gone. In Odessa region, debris from downed drones caused a fire in the territory of the energy facility. It has already been extinguished, so Odessa's being aimed at. MiG-31Ks attacked from the town of Stry in Lviv region with Kinzhal missiles. The Air Force reports monitoring channels write that there were 8 missiles. According to the General Staff, 37 out of the 40 drones were shot down. Well, the figure's 39 or 37, who knows. Information about the missiles is being clarified. About the drone missiles is being clarified. In total, anyway, Russia launched more than 40 missiles and about 40 other attack drones into Ukraine. Some of the missiles and Shaheeds were shot down. Zelensky said that Ukraine needed air defense and other defense support rather than turning a blind eye and long discussions. He's desperate. Ukraine are desperate. It's unbearable, says Olena Halushka. Russia has just struck the Odessa district with ballistic missiles, killing 4, including a 10-year-old girl, and injuring 7. One man lost both legs. Doctors fight for his life. For goodness sake. The West has enough patriots which were produced to save people, not collect dust. And then yesterday, again, another Ukrainian hospital was targeted by Russian missiles, as is the custom every day, every night for 2 years. So this time involved Chansk. And then we move on to other stuff. So now I'm going to go to where I'm annoyed with the Biden government. So I am super annoyed with Trump. I'm super annoyed with the MAGA movement of Republicans who I think are complicit in Russian war crimes. I think they are complicit in Russian war crimes. I'm that angry today. But I'm super angry with the position the Biden administration is taking with regard to Ukrainian strikes into Russia. So just now at a hearing in Congress, Assistant Secretary of Defense Dr. Wallander says that Russian oil and gas infrastructure is a civilian target. Congressman Austin Scott called this out and said that Ukraine should be able to target Russian energy infrastructure. She just said it again. Okay, now this is understandably a tricky discussion because on the one hand, I've just been slamming Russia for hitting Ukraine's energy infrastructure and how terrible that is. And so there is an element of what's called the tu quoque fallacy, which is to say that if I accused you of murdering someone and said, look, it's really morally bad that you murdered someone, and you said to me, yeah, but you murdered someone 3 years ago, that's the tu quoque, the U2 fallacy. It may be true that I murdered someone, and that may itself be morally bad, and I may be a hypocrite in saying, oh, look, you murdered someone. However, it does not morally excuse you doing that. So my moral attack on you and my moral evaluation of what you have done is not at all in itself. The moral evaluation is not affected by what I have done. I could have done way worse than you. All I am being is hypocritical, but it doesn't affect the moral evaluation of what you've done. So in other words, you know, there is this idea that well, look, Ukraine have done bad things. Russia have done bad things into Ukraine. Therefore, it's very difficult. You could say, well, Ukraine are now attacking Russian energy infrastructure. And that is in itself bad, irrespective of what's happened before. And so, you know, it can be hypocritical, but it's still morally bad if you are saying Russia hitting Ukraine is morally bad in and of itself. The difference here is, or one can pick out a difference, in that the Russians are the aggressors here and have done that, and there's no need for this. And just morally reprehensible any kind of invasion, any kind of war, any kind of destruction within Ukraine at the hands of the Russians. And so the Ukrainians are now fighting for their lives. And one of the ways that they can stop this is that they can hit the Russian energy infrastructure, or at least the refining. It's not actually the production of energy for their homes, it's oil refining, which then stops money coming into the government, which then stops the government being able to fund the war. So oil refineries are different from thermal power plants. And you could argue that they are hitting commercial and civilian, well, more commercial infrastructure there. But this is, I think, categorically different to what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. And I think Ukraine are thoroughly justified in hitting the oil refineries in Russia. And in fact, although the Assistant Secretary of Defense has said that these are civilian targets and repeated that, in the Department of Defense Law of War Manual, it's a little bit different. So this quote is quite something, Wallender's quote, coming from a US official going against a US position on legal targets, war supporting and war sustaining industries. And yes, the US position is that power plants, quote, usually qualify as military objectives too. So the quote from the Law of War Manual says economic objects associated with military operations or the war supporting or war sustaining industries have been regarded as military objectives. So oil refineries are definitely that, either prima facie with the oil refined products going to the military so that they can drive their vehicles, but also sustaining the war more generally. Electric power stations are generally recognised to be of sufficient importance to the state's capacity to meet its wartime needs of communication, transport and industry, so as usually to qualify as military objectives during armed conflicts. So that's interesting. So there's a lot of heavy lifting done by usually and generally there, right? And how do you differentiate between when they do and when they don't? But the idea is that you could argue that Russia are actually hitting military targets by hitting the energy infrastructure there. I think there's a big argument to be had around that, and I think that they're basically crippling the entire country in order to. But the idea that the whole war is itself illegal. I mean, it doesn't matter whether, you could, under the law of war, as the Department of Defense in the US see it, hitting energy infrastructure is generally seen as military targets, because the whole military war is itself not legal and not justified and thoroughly morally reprehensible. So we don't need to look in there to know about this, right? So that's the Russians. So the Ukrainians, I think, are therefore justified in hitting back as much as they can against the Russians to stop the terrible thing that the Russians are doing. There's some kind of moral consequentialism going on here, where the consequences obtain a moral value, and the moral value here is like no one wants to see oil refineries get blown up, but in order to try and stop Russia doing a more terrible thing, the Ukrainians are going to have to do what can be quite uncomfortable for some. I don't think the Americans what the Biden administration, Department of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and the Assistant Secretary are saying is at all justifiable, and this is annoying me to the point where, as mentioned earlier, Austin Scott, I think it is, says this, and let's listen to him.
When the Ukrainians hit Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, the Biden administration came out and condemned the Ukrainians for hitting Russia's oil and gas infrastructure and suggested that they should not do that again. Can you tell me why, while Russia is attacking Ukrainians' oil and gas and energy sector, why shouldn't the Ukrainians attack the Russian oil and gas and energy sector?
The issue on attacking critical infrastructure is when those are civilian targets, we have concerns because Ukraine holds itself to the highest standards of observing the laws of armed conflict, and that's one of the elements of being a European democracy.
But the Russians are attacking the oil and gas infrastructure in Ukraine, correct?
Absolutely.
And if you're going to win a war, you can't sit back and take punches and not deliver punches. So why shouldn't the Ukrainians attack the oil and gas infrastructure in Russia?
Congressman, we have concerns about striking at civilian targets when we support countries. Again, this is Ukraine's sovereign decision, but we express those concerns.
But those oil and gas infrastructures in Russia are owned by the Kremlin, correct? It's not like they're owned by a private corporation that have shareholders and private assets are being destroyed.
They are owned by private Russian citizens who are part of the Putin regime. That is correct.
I mean, it makes sense to me that we should destroy them.
There you go. And there is a genuine discussion to be had there. Like, I don't think it's like 100% clear cut. And it's about, well, Ukraine have to adhere to the highest standards if they're going to maintain the moral high ground and keep getting support, unequivocal support from allies. But then that really constrains Kiev to be able to win this war, in being able to win this war. Like, they need some elbow room at least to hammer away at the Russian ability to make money. But also, as many people have pointed out, it's one thing for the US to say, you shouldn't do this, we don't like you doing that, and then also not supply them with the aid that would allow them to strike at the targets that the US want them to strike at. Like, they're not allowing Ukraine to use Western weapons inside the Russian territory. So it's like, yeah, sure, if you want us to hit those things, then, you can come and help us with that. But at the moment, there's been no significant aid for 6 months. So that argument is raging at the moment. Jens Stoltenberg from NATO has come out and said Ukraine has a right to strike at legitimate Russian military targets outside Ukraine for the purpose of self-defense, which is interesting because that seems to be entirely against what the US is saying. So there is some real... there's a lot of discussion to be had about this, I think, and this is far from over. And, as War translated, Dmitry says, with that thermal power station in Kyiv being attacked and destroyed, while Americans have the audacity to condemn the Ukrainian self-defense as attacks against civilian infrastructure, the terrorist state of Russia has no reservations when it comes to shelling truly critical civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. This will come down to an application of the two-cocktail fallacy. It's like, yeah, okay, you are murdering our civilian infrastructure. What can we do about murdering your civilian infrastructure? The question is it like for like? Is it actually civilian infrastructure in the same way thermal power plants? Power, like if civilians don't have power, as opposed to civilians don't have refined oil products, it depends where that refined oil products, it depends where they are going. But is gasoline in your car, petrol in your car, the same as energy to heat your home and power your lives? I don't know. I think there's another big question around that. And meanwhile, again, as Dmitry says, amazing, you have Russian propagandists literally ridiculing the Americans for condemning Ukrainian oil refinery attacks. He says this is insane and that Washington's argumentation is ridiculous and tells you about its decline. You've got some Russian propagandists taking a piss out of the US for not being strong enough on attacks on Russian oil refinery infrastructure. It's crazy. Okay, back on to what's been going on with distant strikes. Kazan yesterday in Russia, something exploded there, big fire. Don't know what all that's about. And then apparently last night, Russian authorities reported an attack on Zheleznogorsk mining and processing plant in Kursk region. So that's just north of Ukraine. You've got Kursk, Bryansk, and Belgorod, all north of Ukraine there. Dang, that was a hit, says one. Mikhailovsky plant in Zheleznogorsk is part of the largest iron ore company in Russia and the CIS, Metalloinvest, and is one of the leaders in the Russian mining and metallurgical industry. Now, if Ukraine has hit that with, say, drones or missiles or whatever, then that is exactly what we've just been talking about in the last segment about whether Ukraine should have the right to hit that. Overnight and early in the morning, drones attacked the Tambov region in Russia. The Russian Ministry of Defense claims 3 drones were intercepted and destroyed. The drones were reportedly aimed at a powder mixing workshop in Kotovsk. Have no idea about any success about what's happened from really any of those strikes we've just talked about. With regard to Borisovglesk air base in Russia, where they hit the aviation training center, there is satellite imagery of that being hit. What was destroyed, what capabilities being taken out, if any, is, I guess, unknown. And then moving on, we've got, going back to Christopher Cavoli, who talked to us about the 5-to-1 ratio moving to 10-to-1. He said Ukraine will run out of ammunition and air defense interceptors missiles in fairly short order without further support from the US, said General Christopher Cavoli, the top US commander in Europe, in comments to Congress yesterday. So this is where I would like people in Congress, like freaking Mike Johnson, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'd like people in the DOD to sit down with Marjorie Taylor Greene and tell them what for, and tell them exactly what's going on in no uncertain terms, and then get Marjorie Taylor Greene to steel man the best version of their arguments back and then destroy those arguments. And that needs to be done publicly so the American public can understand that people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene are standing on nothing more than the shoulders of Russian propagandists that are providing nothing more than straight up Russian propaganda. Okay, German aid to Ukraine said, long tweet, and I'm going to kind of try and praise you this. So there were lots of things shot down last night. I'm asked about this repeatedly, he says. I would like to dedicate a longer tweet to German pledges today. IRIS-T medium range missile systems. 3 have been delivered, 9 have been pledged. Keep getting asked about the IRIS-T SLM in particular. 2 of the 3 systems supplied are said to be in Kyiv and deliver an almost 100% hit rate. This year, Ukraine is expecting a total of 5 IRIS-T SLM systems from Germany. How's that to be achieved? I have no idea. According to the manufacturer, they're currently managing to produce between 4 and 8 systems per year. In my opinion, the reason why we don't see the results is due to the production of the missiles. The production capacity of the IRIS-T SL missiles in Deal Defense is said to be around 500 missiles a year. The problem here is said to be the complex and very effective imaging infrared seeker heads that are built into the missiles. I can't say for sure whether the figure of 500 missiles per year also includes IRIS-T missiles. I hope not. In my opinion, there are no other limiting factors. right, we'll move on. Manufacturing expanding its facilities, but obviously they need to get more of those pledged systems and then loads of the missiles as much as possible. This is about ramping up underutilized manufacturing potential and capacities. RST SLS is a short range. One has been delivered, 11 pledged. So Germany is also supplying Ukraine with RST SLS. SLS was announced as pure launchers, i.e. without their radar units, for example, so that they would have to be integrated into the RST SLM systems. The benefits are that SLS launchers, so the short-range ones, use cheaper and less powerful RST missiles, which are faster and cheaper produced in service with many nations around the world, and are therefore to be used on a more cost-efficient solution against cheaper targets like drones. Here too, we have not seen any new deliveries to Ukraine for ages after the first two launches were delivered in August 2023. Recently, however, 24 pledged and delivered RST SLS launchers have become 12 pledged and delivered RST SLS launchers. I cannot say whether this is not uncommon communication error on the German side or whether they are now really making proper air defense systems out of them for Ukraine. So there's confusion there. The Gepards or Cheetahs, 52 have been delivered from Germany, 15 more are pledged. The Gepard has been decommissioned by the Bundeswehr for many years, so it has had to be refurbished and supplied by the industry. Regarding the Gepard Spags, so self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, I would say they really did everything they could. Not only has a new production line for new ammunition been set up, especially for Ukraine, and the supply of ammunition for the near future secured for a 3-digit million sum, but strong diplomatic efforts have also been made to get more systems into Ukraine. For example, Germany bought back 15 Gepards from Qatar, most likely for a lot of money. They are already all in Ukraine. We also have bought back an officially unknown amount of Cheetah with better radars than the Gepard Spags from Jordan in cooperation with the US, 15 of which Germany would like to deliver to Ukraine according to the current information. The Cheetahs were actually announced to arrive by the end of 2023. It's now April, and according to official information, not a single one has arrived in Ukraine, and no visual evidence of them being in Ukraine. Okay, then we got MIM 104 Patriots. 2 have been delivered, plus 2 launchers and 1 radar. Let's move on to the system that is currently on everyone's lips, Patriot. Firstly, I would like to point out, and I know I'm making myself unpopular, that nobody has supplied more Patriot equipment to Ukraine than Germany. After all, we not only supply 2 complete systems, but also 2 additional launchers and an extra radar. There are currently no plans to supply further systems from the Bundeswehr stocks to Ukraine, although this can of course not be ruled out. The Bundeswehr currently has 10 fully operational systems in its inventory. Many of these are either tied up in industry for maintenance and upgrades or for NATO commitments. Although funds have now been authorised for the procurement of 4 new Patriot systems and 500 new missiles have also been purchased, the first system will not be delivered until next year, and delivery including additional kits for radars will take until 2029. Germany will have to wait even longer for the 500 missiles. Delivery is scheduled to take place between 2027 and 2033. Although replacements have been procured, I would therefore like to point out that Germany sometimes has to wait a very long time for replacements to arrive, while expecting that Russia would be ready for a war against NATO in the next 5 to 8 years at the latest. Nevertheless, we are continuing to supply new missiles to Ukraine. Only recently, a new delivery from Bundeswehr stocks was announced for Ukraine, which will most likely be carried out in the next few weeks. In addition, the government is currently working with Ukraine and European partners on a fund to buy Patriot systems around the world and supply them to Ukraine. More information will be provided soon. Skynex, so this is kind of the Gepard, but the much newer version, which looks absolutely amazing. The Rheinmetall piece of kit. This 1 has been delivered, 3 have been pledged. That might well have been the prototype that was initially constructed. Not so sure, but anyway. 2 months ago, Germany announced it would also be supplying 2 Skynex systems to Ukraine next year. Although an extremely similar system was in stock, Mantis, its 2 systems were handed over to Slovakia free of charge in November 2023 after 2 Patriot systems and a single army company had been stationed in Slovakia for a very long time following Slovakia's delivery of an S-300 to Ukraine. So obviously there's some deals going on with Slovakia getting stuff to Ukraine. So anyway, that's I think a useful addition to what Germany are doing to help this problem. But really, as Dmytro Kuleba, the foreign minister for Ukraine, says, Ukraine has identified over 100 available Patriot air defense systems held by allies, urging the transfer of at least 7 of them. So come on, guys, we can get 7 out of 100 to bolster Ukrainian defenses against Russian attacks. I feel like hitting the wall. I just don't understand why it's not happening says Kuleba. People in Ukraine are desperate, both the population and politicians. Zelensky himself. Things are not going well in terms of Russian strikes on Ukraine that are not going to stop, right? That's going to get worse. It's only... How many power plants have been taken out in the last month? Russia aren't just going to go, well, that's done and dusted, we'll leave that now. They're going to keep doing that until Ukraine has no power. They'll be throwing Kinzhaus in. They can smell blood at the moment. They have wind behind their sails. This will continue until allies do something about it. Right, this is in response to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who said Russian Christians are being persecuted by Ukraine somehow. I don't know how that is. I mean, it's basically a massive Russian lie that she is regurgitating. But indeed, it's the other way around. It's complete projection here. Ukrainian Christians have been persecuted right the way through this war by the Russians systematically in the occupied regions. And in fact, PBS is just almost in response to Marjorie Taylor Greene has come out with this report. Well, actually, it's a video that has a transcript to it. Ukrainian Christian groups face violent crackdown from Russian forces. And there you go. And you can go and read all about that. But it's just like, here's evidence, rather than just a mere assertion on some interview with Steve Bannon, where you spout Russian propaganda. Marjorie Taylor Greene needs some kind of censoring in some way. She is dangerous, and she is undermining US national security and undermining Ukrainian success in this war. Her and others like her. And it's disgusting. I talked to you yesterday in my kind of breaking news piece that Starlink terminals are potentially being blocked in Russia now, which is in Russian occupied territory, which is good news. But this is just a couple of people have talked about this. This is just from one source, from some Russian source within, intercepted or social media sources. Russian soldiers talking about how their systems are being blocked. Have absolutely no idea about the accuracy of these claims and how widespread they might be. But it could be good news if that is the case. Could be incredibly good news. Now onto something completely different. Falsely flagged vessel operating outside of international scrutiny. The US Treasury sanctioned the Laodicea vessel, which changed its name then to San Cosmas and changed its flag to Eswatini. Don't even know where that is. But then got deflagged, transited the Bosphorus towards the Black Sea, so the Bosphorus Straits in Turkey, Istanbul, after delivering stolen wheat from occupied Sevastopol to the Middle East. This is how they're getting around this, and this is where the international community needs to be really good at closing those loopholes and enforcing these sanctions on these ghost flagships, ghost ships and ghost fleets, ships that turn off transponders, ships that deflag or change flags or change names. It's bad. Right, and actually, I'm going to do that in the geopolitical bit next. So anyway, that's enough from me. That's quite a long one and a bit ranty. I am angry today. I'm deeply angry because what is good and right and proper is not taking place. And the American democratic system appears to be completely unable to function. This has been the congressional session with the least amount of actual work done in, I forget since when, but it's in history, one of the least fertile congressional sessions, and it's terrible. Nothing is getting done, and the whole of the democratic process is being held to ransom by Mike Johnson, by Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, and people like Donald Trump Jr., and then by Trump himself. And you can follow that down, and here we are. And here we still are 6 months later, and yet people still have the audacity to say, oh, this is Biden's fault for the border or something like that. No, it's not. That's Russian disinformation. This is because certain people, for some weird reason, don't want to help Ukraine. And for some weird reason, think it's in the US's best interest to support Russia more than Ukraine. And if you don't find that deeply disturbing, then we need to have a discussion. So I will have that discussion later. Anyway, I need a cup of tea. Take care. Speak soon.